Uh-oh.
Okay, we'll start with this. Another addition to the undercard of the Jonas versus Price fight. A really good one that was supposed to have gone down sometime last year. The Chloe Watson versus Jasmina Zapotoczna fight for what is the EBU title.
UK versus Poland.
Yes, you may have seen Jasmina Zapotoczna boxing once or twice on Matchroom shows, even though she herself was never a Matchroom fighter. You may have seen Chloe Watson boxing on some Wasserman shows, and I believe she still is a Wasserman fighter, but they wanted to deck out this card with female talent, good female fights, and this is one among them.
Why didn't they fight?
I think it's that Chloe Watson either fell ill or got injured en route to the fight. It was something like that. Now they've added it to the Jonas versus Price undercard. What is a genuinely tough fight to call, genuinely tough to edge, scheduled for 10 rounds in the women's flyweight division. Jasmina Zapotoczna sports a professional record of 8 wins with 1 loss, no draws, no recorded knockouts.
She's long and limber for the weight. She's got height, she's got length, and she knows how to use it. If you saw the Maisie Rose fight, you know what I'm talking about.
You can think of Jasmina Zapotoczna as a busier version of Sky Nicholson. That's what she resembles. A long and limber fighter that fights on her toes, uses the ring, stays behind the jab, but she does let go of her hands more. And she does show a bit more mid-range to inside than what we've seen from Sky. That's kind of what she looks like. Chloe,
Jasmina's 30, whereas Chloe's 25.
sporting a professional record, an unblemished record of 8 wins, no losses, no draws, no recorded knockouts. Neither Chloe or Jasmina would ever be accused of being devastating punchers. They're not big punchers, either of them. So in all likelihood, this fight goes the distance. Chloe last saw action in June of last year opposite the ring Kate Radomska. It's the only fight she had. She would have had 2, but like I said, she had to withdraw from the Jasmina Zapotoczna fight.
That would have been her second fight last year.
She's been with Wasserman Promotions for some time now, and they do a good job of keeping her active, keeping her busy. Just last year, she only fought once, but that's not their fault. Jasmina last saw action in July. Last year was a very productive year for Jasmina. She fought 3 times. Once in February, again in June, then again in July. She's on a 2-fight winning streak, having suffered her first professional loss to Shannon Ryan. She rebounded off the loss, then built on that.
Upset Maisie Rose on a Matchroom show.
Gave her her first professional loss, boxing her up real nice, using her aggression and come forwardness against her. It was a great display of boxing from Jasmina. Will she do the same thing to Chloe Watson? I don't know the tale of the tape yet, but I get the sense that Jasmina's gonna have height and length over Chloe, who's a more compact, moderately sized flyweight, whereas Jasmina, she's tall for the weight. She's got some height, some length.
It's a 50-50 fight to me.
I know she's got one career blemish, but Jasmina has a better resume than Chloe Watson. She does. You take away more from losing to Shannon Ryan than beating Maisie Rose than the girls that Chloe's been fighting. Not that there's anything wrong with those girls.
But none of them were as good as Shannon. None of them were as good as Maisie Rose. That was some ambitious matchmaking.
I like what I've seen from Chloe Watson. I mean, so far, so good. But being honest, none of it is as impressive as Jasmina Zapotoczna going to Matchroom and beating the Matchroom fighter there. I'm more impressed by that than anything I've seen from Chloe so far, though at the same time, Chloe will have home field advantage. This fight is happening on British soil.
It's a tough fight to edge, man, but it's a really good one. It's a good addition to the undercard of Jonas versus Price. We'll talk more about it. as the fight date approaches.
Men's super bantamweight news. Naoya Inoue capping a Cinco de Mayo triple header in Vegas makes perfect sense. What was once a territorial celebration fastly has the potential to become a worldwide boxing fiesta weekend. There is an opening, along with interest and momentum, to cap off a stirring first weekend in May by creating a third major Cinco de Mayo weekend card, marking the return of Japan's undisputed super bantamweight champion Naoya Inoue to Las Vegas to meet the Mexican challenger Alan David Picasso in the sport's traditional holiday spot. It's a great idea. Las Vegas is used to having fights on Cinco de Mayo weekend, and it would not interfere with any of the other fight times, said an individual advocating for the triple header, who spoke on the condition of anonymity because of still unfinished business. The great Inoue meeting a proud representative of Mexico in Picasso in his customary event, which all of these Mexican warriors have fought: Salvador Sanchez, Julio Cesar Chavez, Oscar De La Hoya, Juan Manuel Marquez, and Canelo Alvarez. There must be a fight in Vegas on that date. The Saudi Arabian power broker, Turki El Sheikh, set up the extravaganza by first negotiating the May 2nd doubleheader comeback of antagonists Ryan Garcia and Devin Haney at New York's Times Square. Southern California's Garcia, 24-1 with 20 knockouts, is due to fight the former WBA junior welterweight champion Rolly Romero, and former 2-division champion Devin Haney will meet ex-unified 140-pound champion Jose Ramirez in separate bouts intended to set up a rematch in October. The anticipation of that event leads to the long-term Cinco de Mayo fixture, Saul Canelo Alvarez taking his act to Saudi Arabia to headline a card that will be streamed to the U.S. in the afternoon hours. It was recently announced that Alvarez had struck a 4-fight agreement with El Sheikh that will open with his bid to reclaim his stance as the undisputed super middleweight champion against IBF titleist and prohibitive underdog William Skull of Cuba. Alvarez would then be set to defend his undisputed crown against the 2-time undisputed and unbeaten 4-division champion Terence Crawford in September.
I wondered about that. Since Canelo's fight is happening in Saudi, is it going to come on in the afternoon like their other shows, or will they try to accommodate it for U.S. primetime hours? It appears we have our answer.
Alvarez's shift to El Sheikh's Riyadh season promotion seemed to leave a void in the U.S. market, considering the Cinco de Mayo tradition of staging prominent boxing matches in Vegas, which De La Hoya embraced in 1995 and 2003 before launching a nearly uninterrupted 20-year string of events in 2006 that Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Canelo Alvarez successfully followed. The jovial Sin City mood routinely creates week-long festivities building up to high-profile Saturday night boxing on the Strip. Anchoring a Las Vegas card with the Riyadh season-sponsored Inoue would be a sublime maneuver to top off the smorgasbord of pugilism. Inoue, 31, has only fought in the U.S. 3 times previously, twice in the pandemic-era cards in Vegas in 2020 and 2021, and another time near L.A. on an undercard back in 2017.
Chocolatito's undercard.
His global popularity has boomed since. The monster has risen to become a 4-weight champion who in 2024 drew 55,000 to the Tokyo Dome for his knockout win over Mexico's Luis Neri.
The 24-year-old Picasso, 31-0 with 1 draw, 17 knockouts, is the WBC's number 1 rated contender who scored a 3rd-round knockout victory in December in Tijuana over Colombia's Yeson Cuello. Inoue was originally pointing to an April date in Vegas before his planned December opponent, Sam Goodman, got cut above the eye in sparring and forced a postponement, then withdrew from what was their late January bout. Another individual connected to the Inoue Vegas date said that while multiple conversations and negotiations are required to finalize the May 3rd appearance, the fact that its timing will complement the Garcia versus Haney doubleheader and Alvarez to Saudi Arabia affair make it an ideal slot to fill. There's no interference with anything else, and bringing a Cinco de Mayo fight to Vegas is something this sport has done for so long now, it makes perfect sense.
So I don't want to get too excited about this because I really like the sound of it, but I don't know that it's anything more than just a suggestion. That is, I don't know that there are wheels in motion to bring Inoue to Vegas in May, or is this just an idea this individual is floating out there, this anonymous individual? But it does make sense. If the Canelo card is happening in the afternoon, due to it being in Saudi, there's no reason you can't put Inoue's fight later on in the day in Vegas. It does make perfect sense.
He is fighting a Mexican fighter.
All-day boxing on Cinco de Mayo weekend makes almost too much sense. But like I said, I don't know that Team Inoue are actually working towards this, or it's just a lofty idea that somebody came up with. We have to see. But they're all connected to Turkey, which is what makes it viable. Canelo's working with Turkey, so is Inoue.
So it can happen.
You get the logistics right, we'll have one hell of a weekend in boxing. And just in keeping with the theme of Cinco de Mayo events, things set to be happening on that day. Bruno Surace and Jaime Munguia are finalizing a deal for a May 3rd super middleweight rematch in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, on the undercard of Canelo Alvarez's fight. It's almost too perfect. What better way and on what better day for Jaime to exact his vengeance upon the Frenchman than to take him on Cinco de Mayo weekend?
Understand something. Most people were likely picking Jaime to win the rematch, irrespective of what happened last year and how it took us all by surprise. I think most people were picking Jaime to win the Bruno Surace rematch, but it happening on Cinco de Mayo weekend on Canelo Alvarez's undercard, that's perfect. Inoue's fight landing on that same day would be the trifecta. I don't think Bruno catches lightning in a bottle twice, least of all now that Jaime is being trained by Eddie Reynoso. We're seeing the first images of Jaime sparring Canelo Alvarez, learning from him, not just what he took away from their fight, but in camp. He's going into the rematch with all the situational awareness he didn't go into their first fight with. At least now he knows to respect Bruno, to take him seriously, because maybe he didn't the first time out. Whatever it was.
It won't happen again, and I'm not one for jumping to conclusions or being presumptuous, but I'm fairly confident Jaime will avenge the loss. He's gonna knock him out this time.
He's gonna do it.
It's just one of those things that happen in boxing, one of those freak occurrences, freak accidents that happen when you least expect them. That's what I chalk it up to. But he won't catch lightning in a bottle twice.
Bruno's gonna get his ass kicked.
Talk more about it as the fight date approaches. And just in keeping with the theme of super middleweight news, Edgar Berlanga's next fight has been announced, and it's an even more underwhelming opponent than usual, but with purpose. There's a reason he's fighting this Jonathan Ortiz guy on the undercard of Emma Williams versus Patrice Volney.
He's fighting on an undercard. I thought he was supposed to be making a big comeback to Puerto Rico in his next fight.
Former IBF champion and Edgar Berlanga's rival, Caleb Plant, reacted to the news, saying, "And the crowd goes mild." Anyways, $40 on Pump 3, my guy. I appreciate it.
What's he trying to say?
That the guy Edgar's fighting fights like a 2-bit bum that ought to be pumping gas in Jersey.
Ouch.
Veteran boxing scribe Mike Copinger tweeted, Keith Connolly told ESPN, Berlanga being added as the co-main event on March 15th was a strategic move on our part to keep Edgar active since the big fight we are targeting isn't available till later this summer. I won't get into the details, but everyone will realize later on why we made this move and how it leads to one of the big fights next.
So they say.
Now, Edgar Berlanga isn't known for the most ambitious matchmaking, quite the opposite, but this is an even more underwhelming opponent than usual. So what's going on here? Rumors abound. There are widespread rumors that this could be Edgar's last fight on Matchroom.
I heard a rumor a few weeks ago that this will be his last fight on Matchroom and that he may be migrating over to MVP, who has a lot of ties to the island of Puerto Rico. Jake is based out of there. Amanda, obviously.
They happen to be developing a good number of fighters from the island of Puerto Rico, thus Edgar going over there would be in keeping with the decorum. So when you land on a Jonathan Ortiz, it's likely because you don't want to take on a risky fight. You want to make a seamless transition from Matchroom to MVP.
If that rumor checks out, like I said, it's just something I heard. It's just a rumor. It should be treated as such. What Keith Connolly is hinting at is a big fight. A major fight.
Let's talk about this one. Let's talk about this guy that Edgar's fighting. This is a guy who took something like a 10 or 11 year hiatus from May of 2014 to March of 2024.
A hiatus from what? Boxing?
I mean, I think on a break like that, you're barely a boxer. You're barely a professional boxer. But he takes a 10-year hiatus, comes back in March of last year, and he had about 2 fights. One in March, then again in June. And those are the only 2 fights he's had in approximately 10 or 11 years. And there's not a single world-level opponent in there. Nobody solid. This is very much a fringe contender, an outlier, and a guy who, by all accounts, is barely a boxer.
Still unbeaten.
Well, it's a lot easier to stay an unbeaten fighter when you don't fight for 10 years. Wouldn't you agree? They seem to have something coming down the pipeline, something in the works, something major according to Manager of the Year, Keith Connolly. But what? What makes for a major fight with Edgar Berlanga?
A Caleb Plant fight?
Perhaps a Jaime Munguia fight? A Diego Pacheco fight? Though Diego Pacheco, if that's what Keith is hinting at, that would indicate that he's not leaving Matchroom, that he's staying.
If that's what he's talking about. That's why I'm not too attached to that rumor that I heard some weeks ago.
It does feel like there might be something to it, but ultimately, we don't know. I don't know any more than you do that rumor holds any water. It's just something I heard. Maybe at the time it was true. Maybe at the time that's a move they were considering, but since then, maybe they changed their mind, and there might be something going on to keep Edgar at Matchroom. We have to see. They're planning a major fight, so the question is, what's a major fight for Edgar in the super middleweight division at this time?
Who says it's at super middleweight?
The imagination can run wild, speculating as to what it was Keith Connolly was hinting at. We really don't know. What we do know is that instead of having a big homecoming in Puerto Rico, Edgar's boxing on an undercard. That could be to finish out his deal with Matchroom, then move on, or that could be for what Keith said. Just get a quick run out, quick activity fight en route to something bigger.
Either way, they have to go to great lengths to keep Edgar Berlanga winning.
They do. I mean, you got guys like Christian Mabili taking on unbeaten Lele Sajo. You got a guy like Diego Pacheco, who just fought a dangerous opponent in Steven Nelson. And then you have Edgar fighting this guy.
It's embarrassing.
But now that he's popped his cherry with Canelo Alvarez, he actually landed that fight. You're exposed to the rest of the division. You're exposed to what other fighters are out there. And the more guys like this you fight, the more obvious you make it.
You're avoiding everyone.
The super middleweight division is a deep division. So often when it's brought up, the conversation is centered around Canelo and what Canelo's doing. But there are a lot of good fights to make here. A lot of good fighters.
Mabili, Munguia, Melakuziev,
Plant, Pacheco, Nelson. There's good fights to be made, but how many of those aforementioned names do you think Edgar can beat? How many of those guys?